Summer of 2008 in Springfield, Ohio, looked like a postcard of Midwestern calm, with tree-lined streets and tidy brick houses promising a safe, ordinary life. But beneath that surface lay shadows that refused to fade. For a long time, residents, Springfield's name carried an uneasy weight. For in the mid-'80s, 3 women from different walks of life were murdered in their own homes. Each crime mirrored the other, victims bound, strangled, and left behind in settings so spotless they felt staged, as though the killer had erased his own presence. The press branded him the Springfield Strangler, a title that unsettled every family, every neighbor, every locked door. When a man with limited mental ability was convicted, the community exhaled in cautious relief, convincing themselves justice had prevailed. Cafes filled with laughter again, church pews crowded on Sundays, and children played outside as though the horror had been buried. Yet over dinner tables and in the sidelong glances of those who lived through it, doubt lingered like smoke after a fire. Was Springfield truly safe? Or had the predator simply slipped into the background? That chilling uncertainty sharpened. In November 1984, when the life of Emily Harper, a bright 21-year-old junior at Wright State University, became the first act of a nightmare that would haunt the community for decades. Emily, warm-hearted and diligent, dreamed of becoming a children's counselor, balancing her studies in psychology with a part-time job at a local bookstore. On the night of November 17th, she returned to her modest apartment on Belmont Avenue, a quiet student complex with flickering neon hallway lights and paper-thin walls echoing with the sound of a neighbor's television. When she missed class the next day, her friends assumed she was ill, but by evening, worry outweighed patience, and a close friend persuaded the landlord to open the door. Inside lay a tableau of horror. Emily's body on the bedroom floor, her wrists bound by electrical cord, a brown leather belt cinched tight around her neck. Her clothes were disturbed, the signs of assault chillingly clear, yet the apartment bore no chaos. A glass of water sat untouched on the table, a textbook, open on the sofa, as if her evening had simply been interrupted by evil itself. Police sealed the scene, but the evidence offered nothing. No fingerprints, no forced entry, only whispers from neighbors who thought they heard noises or glimpsed a man in the shadows. Lieutenant Robert Manning, the lead investigator, confessed it was the cleanest crime scene he had ever stood inside, the killer slipping away as though carried by the air itself. Springfield mourned a daughter they could not protect. Emily had no enemies, no debts, no tangled past. Her funeral overflowed with classmates, professors, and neighbors, white flowers strewn across church steps while her mother sat hollow-eyed, broken in silence. Detectives pulled on every loose thread, ex-boyfriends, co-workers, bookstore regulars, yet each lead dissolved into nothing. The locked door without forced entry gnawed at everyone, suggesting Emily might have known her killer, or at least trusted him enough to let him in. And with that realization, fear deepened. What if the monster was not a stranger, but someone they saw every day, smiling across fences, shaking hands in church? As suspicion grew, Springfield's sense of security unraveled. Locks and alarms flew off store shelves, and young women stopped sleeping alone. Emily Harper's name was etched into the town's memory as a painful reminder that even in the quietest corners of America, darkness could live next door, waiting. But Emily Harper's tragic death was only the opening act in a nightmare that would tighten its grip on Springfield. By February of 1985, winter lay heavy over the town, its gray skies and icy winds reflecting a gloom that matched the unsettled spirit of the community. People tried to carry on, attending classes, clocking in at work, filling pews on Sunday mornings, yet every whispered conversation circled back to the same chilling question: who killed Emily, and would he strike again? The answer arrived, sooner than anyone feared, when another name exploded across the headlines, shattering any fragile illusion of safety. Dr. Karen Whitfield. At 27, Karen was a second-year resident at Springfield Regional Hospital, admired by colleagues for her sharp mind and relentless dedication. Just hours before her death, she had completed a punishing 36-hour shift, yet still managed a tired smile as she waved goodnight. For Karen, renting her own 2-story house on East High Street had been a milestone of independence, a symbol of how far she had come. Neighbors saw her carrying groceries that evening, unaware it would be the last time. By the next morning, when she failed to report for her shift, worry sent an older physician, who regarded her like a daughter, to check on her home. A locked door greeted him, but a ground-floor window stood cracked open, cold air whistling through. Police forced their way inside and found a scene that would sear itself into memory. Karen's body lay in her bedroom, hands bound with strips torn from her bedsheet, her neck marked by the cruel constriction of a twisted telephone cord. Her white medical coat rested neatly on a chair, the faint scent of antiseptic lingering, a haunting contrast to the violence that had stolen her life. The half-open window mocked investigators, a silent reminder of how easily the killer had entered and escaped. Yet again, the crime scene was spotless. No prints, no shoe tracks, no stray hairs, just silence and death. A neighbor recalled seeing a man moving through the alley at midnight, but in the darkness, his identity dissolved. News of Karen's murder struck Springfield with brutal force. If Emily's death had been an isolated tragedy, Karen's shattered that illusion. She was not just another victim. She was a young doctor, a source of local pride. Her life cut short with the same cold precision. The parallels were undeniable. Two young women, bound, strangled, left in eerily clean crime scenes. The only difference lay in the instruments of death: Emily's belt, Karen's cord. For journalists, the connection was unmistakable, and whispers of the Springfield Strangler grew louder. Press conferences overflowed, reporters pressing Lieutenant Robert Manning, who admitted with weary candor that the possibility of a serial killer could no longer be ignored, though no suspect had emerged. Panic surged. Stores sold out of locks, alarms, and even guard dogs. Parents forbade their daughters from walking alone after dark. Churches held candlelight vigils, white flames flickering in the night, their fragile glow no match for the darkness enveloping the town. The killer's shadow now haunted every classroom, every coffee shop, every hospital corridor. By autumn of 1986, Springfield's streets glowed with fiery leaves, but beneath the beauty lingered dread. Nearly 2 years had passed since Emily Harper and Dr. Karen Whitfield were taken, yet no answers came. The whispers of the Springfield Strangler refused to fade, drifting like a ghost through the heart of the community, a reminder that the nightmare was not over. It was only waiting. People wanted desperately to believe the nightmare had passed, that Emily Harper and Dr. Karen Whitfield were tragedies linked only by coincidence. But on a cool Sunday morning in late October of 1986, that fragile hope was destroyed. 16-year-old Melissa Carter, a bright junior at Springfield High, became the youngest victim yet. The Carters were a proud, middle-class family, doting on their daughter who loved cheerleading, singing in the church choir, and had even earned a partial scholarship to an arts program. On the night of October 25th, while her parents attended a birthday party in the suburbs, Melissa stayed home to prepare for a math test. They called her around 9, reminding her to rest, and she answered cheerfully. But when they returned, the next morning, their home was unnervingly silent. The door bore no marks of intrusion, yet upstairs, the scene awaiting them shattered their world. Melissa lay lifeless on her bed, wrists bound tightly with nylon rope, a floral silk scarf cinched around her neck. Her wide-open eyes seemed frozen. In terror, her desk lamp still glowing over an unfinished notebook, the pen she had dropped resting on the floor. What should have been an ordinary night of study had become a grotesque crime scene. Police rushed in, but once again they found a house stripped of evidence. No foreign fingerprints, no footprints, no struggle, just a slightly opened bedroom window, mocking investigators with its suggestion of effortless entry and escape. DNA testing in those years was primitive, and whatever trace evidence existed was too faint to reveal the killer's identity. The Springfield Gazette thundered across its front page. Springfield Strangler returns. This time, the town could no longer pretend. The killer wasn't gone. He was back, and he had stolen a child. Panic engulfed Springfield. Parents forbade daughters from being alone. Schools tightened security, and community meetings overflowed with anxious residents demanding protection. Hardware stores sold out of locks, alarms, and guard dogs, but fear outweighed any sense of safety. The press, both local and statewide, cemented the name Springfield Strangler into collective memory, the pattern unmistakable. Young women, bound, strangled with objects found at hand, and scenes so unnaturally clean, it seemed the killer mocked the very idea of justice. The shifting murder weapons, belt, phone cord, scarf, only underscored his cold adaptability. Reporters hounded Lieutenant Manning with relentless questions. Was this a serial killer? Why hadn't he been caught? When would Springfield be safe? Manning, worn from sleepless nights, admitted they were dealing with a meticulous predator, an adversary who studied, planned, and executed with terrifying precision. His words brought no comfort, only a grim sense of inevitability. Melissa's funeral turned into one of the largest gatherings Springfield had ever seen. Hundreds of classmates, clad in cheerleading uniforms and choir robes, lined the steps of the church, their sobs echoing as her small coffin was carried inside. Her parents sat hollow, too shattered for tears, while hymns meant for celebration became dirges of grief. The loss of a teenager enraged the town and forced a chilling acceptance. The Springfield Strangler would not stop. National reporters descended on the once quiet town, amplifying its fear into headlines across America. Springfield was no longer remembered for its tree-lined streets and brick homes, but as a community under siege, a place where even your bedroom was not sacred. As winter settled in with heavy snow, fear itself blanketed every home, thicker than any storm. Families layered their doors with deadbolts, braced windows with bars, even strung beer cans on wires as makeshift alarms. Yet every new precaution only deepened the haunting realization. Springfield was not fortified against evil. The predator still roamed free, watching, waiting, and choosing his next victim with unnerving patience. No lock could truly keep out the shadow that stalked Springfield. Police cruisers, their blue and red lights slicing through the night, patrolled neighborhoods in a show of vigilance, yet the sight offered no comfort, only a reminder that safety had to be performed to exist. Students, nurses, doctors, and single women bore the heaviest weight of fear. Many abandoned apartments to move back in with family or doubled up with friends, while others packed their lives into boxes and fled town altogether. Safety tips spread like gospel. Never answer the door to strangers, never walk home alone at night, always carry pepper spray. Sunday sermons turned from prayers for the dead to desperate pleas for divine protection. Parents forbade their children from being alone, even for a moment, while men volunteered to patrol neighborhoods as self-made watchmen, a fragile supplement to a police force stretched thin. Springfield, once a postcard of Midwestern calm, now pulsed like a war zone where the enemy was invisible and everywhere at once. The press seized the frenzy. Front pages placed the faces of Emily Harper, Dr. Karen Whitfield, and Melissa Carter side by side. 3 vibrant lives extinguished by a faceless predator. The name Springfield Strangler was no longer whispered. It screamed across headlines, drawing comparisons to cities haunted by infamous serial killers. The town's reputation curdled, its streets viewed not as quaint, but cursed. In barbershops and coffee counters, speculation ran wild. Was the killer an escaped convict, a familiar, neighbor, or worse, a professional hiding behind the trust of a badge or a doctor's coat? Theories piled higher than evidence. For the police, the pressure became unbearable. Each press conference turned into an interrogation of its own. Reporters demanded answers. How could 3 young women die without a single lead? Was the killer simply more intelligent than the police? Lieutenant Robert Manning, worn down by sleepless nights and endless files that led nowhere, aged years in months. In a rare, unguarded moment, he confessed, "We're dealing with a cold, calculating mind. He leaves scenes like a void. No traces, no noise. He's a shadow in a room we can't illuminate." The words, meant to describe the challenge, instead confirmed the community's worst fear, that the predator was always a step ahead, untouchable. Talk of vigilante justice surfaced, men plotting to form armed groups, but authorities warned such efforts would spill more innocent blood. Still, families adapted in their own desperate ways. Parents sat with daughters as they studied, windows stayed bolted, and the shrill ring of a late-night telephone sent hearts racing. Springfield's warmth curdled into suspicion. Smiles became brittle, greetings hollow, as if everyone wondered whether the person beside them might harbor the Strangler's darkness. The terror was no longer confined to crime scenes. It had invaded the fabric of daily life. By early 1987, that suffocating fear erupted into demands for action. Residents and reporters alike insisted on a name, someone to hold accountable for 3 lives stolen. Under crushing pressure, investigators turned to Daniel Price, a 27-year-old warehouse worker with the mind of a child. Known around town as quiet, slow, and often teased, Daniel lived with his mother in a worn house by the train tracks. His isolation made him an easy mark for suspicion. In March, a witness claimed they had seen him near Emily Harper's apartment the night she died, and police brought him in. What followed was less interrogation than assault, hours of relentless questioning, officers repeating the same accusations, until Daniel faltered. Frightened, confused, and desperate to appease authority, he muttered vague acknowledgments that he might have known Emily, might have done something wrong. His words, muddled and uncertain, were transcribed as a confession. In that moment, Springfield believed it had found its monster, but in truth, the nightmare was only being buried alive, ready to surface again. The interrogation transcript of Daniel Price stretched 50 pages, yet its contents were as thin as air. He couldn't describe Emily Harper's apartment, the brown belt used to strangle her, or even basic details of her life. His words stumbled like broken puzzle pieces, hazy and disjointed. Still, for a town suffocating under fear, Springfield's police and prosecutors seized on Daniel as the lifeline they desperately needed. To the public, a confession, no matter how flawed, was enough. They paraded him before cameras, announcing the killer had confessed, that Springfield could finally breathe. His trial was swift, almost mechanical. Prosecutors painted him as a lonely, frustrated outcast who lashed out in violence, leaning heavily on the shaky confession. Daniel's court-appointed lawyer, overworked and ill-prepared, mounted little defense. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses, yet when the words of his confession were read aloud in court, the jury saw guilt. On sentencing day, Daniel stood trembling, head bowed, muttering that he didn't remember what he had done. The judge's gavel silenced him. 35 years in prison. The headline the next morning was triumphant. Springfield Strangler caught. Justice for Emily Harper. For the first time in years, children played freely outside. Students walked alone to their apartments, and mothers loosened their grip. Springfield was ready to believe the darkness was gone. But beneath that surface calm, questions smoldered. A handful of reporters pointed out the contradictions. How could Daniel, a man without a car, appear at Emily's apartment and vanish without a trace? Why did his confession lack every meaningful detail of the crime? And if he was guilty, why had the killing stopped so abruptly, almost too perfectly after his arrest? Even Lieutenant Robert Manning, who publicly declared victory, confided to a colleague in private, "Something doesn't add up, but my hands are tied." Daniel himself drifted through prison like a ghost, bewildered, telling anyone who would listen that people said he did something terrible, but he couldn't remember what. His mother, Martha Price, believed him without question. Tirelessly, she wrote to newspapers, filed appeals, pleaded with human rights groups, but her letters vanished into silence. For the justice system, the case was closed. Still, Springfield carried a wound hidden beneath the bandage of relief. Families of the victims bore it most of all. Emily's parents visited her grave with flowers, waiting for answers carved not in stone, but in truth that never came. Melissa, Carter's mother, refused to change a single detail in her daughter's room, keeping the pink blanket folded, the half-filled diary frozen in time. Karen Whitfield's father, a hardened veteran, was seen night after night staring blankly from his porch, the street before him as empty as his future. Daniel's conviction had not healed them. It had only buried their grief under a verdict that offered no closure. By the early 1990s, Springfield pretended to move forward. Newspapers shifted to politics and sports. Families reopened, windows in summer, and the files of the 3 victims gathered dust in archives. Journalists who once questioned the case fell silent, pressured by a community eager to bury its fear. But Lieutenant Manning couldn't let go. Long after press conferences ended, he kept the files in a private drawer, revisiting them during sleepless nights. Each time he read Daniel's fractured words, each time he revisited the photographs of spotless crime scenes, the doubts surged back. Manning never said it aloud, but deep inside, he knew the truth. Justice had not been served. Springfield had chosen silence, but silence could not erase the shadow that still lingered. By the mid-1990s, Springfield seemed to have reclaimed its small-town charm. Country music floated out of diners, children laughed at fall carnivals, and red and gold leaves gathered in quiet streets. For those who hadn't lived through the terror, the Springfield Strangler was reduced to a hushed cautionary tale. Parents told their kids, a boogeyman folded into local lore. But for families who had lost daughters, the wound never healed. Every time news broke of a murder somewhere else in America, Springfield flinched, hearts reopening to pain they had tried so hard to bury. Outwardly, the community wore smiles again. Yet beneath every Sunday sermon, every parade, a shadow lingered. Had the monster truly been caged, or had the truth been buried under a false conviction? By 2008, more than 20 years after the last known killing, Springfield stood at the intersection of memory and denial. Families of the victims still carried grief in silence. Emily Harper's parents left fresh flowers at her grave. Melissa Carter's mother kept her daughter's room untouched. Karen Whitfield's father still sat in his porch chair, staring at nothing. Then came a spark from an unlikely place: Ohio's cold case unit. Forensic science had leapt decades beyond what was possible in the 80s, and the state had begun re-examining unsolved murders. Springfield's haunting trio of cases sat near the top of the list. Old evidence bags were pulled from storage, their seals unbroken for decades. The twisted electrical cord from Karen's neck, the silk scarf that silenced Melissa, the overlooked samples from Emily's scene. Now, for the first time, they would face modern DNA testing. When retired Lieutenant Robert Manning heard the news, he wept. For decades he had carried a private certainty that Daniel Price was not the true strangler, that justice had been forced, rather than found. Now perhaps science could do what men could not. Investigators meticulously extracted trace samples, running them through advanced machines, and cross-referencing them with CODIS, the national DNA database. Then it happened. A partial match blinked onto the screen. The DNA recovered from Karen's cord was linked to a profile already stored in the system. Not a full identity, but a close familial connection. The room fell silent. For over 2 decades the Strangler had walked free, yet here, finally, was a trace. Quietly, investigators pressed forward. To release news too soon would risk igniting panic in Springfield. More tests were run. This time, on Melissa's scarf. The same trace appeared, the same partial match. Doubt was gone. The man imprisoned for Emily's murder was not the predator who haunted Springfield. The real killer was still out there, shielded by time and anonymity. With the DNA pointing to a relative of a man serving time for violent crime in another state, experts in genetic genealogy were called in. Patiently, they built family trees, combing through birth records, death certificates, marriage logs, and census rolls. A web of connections emerged, narrowing toward a handful of possible suspects tied by blood to the CODIS match. For the investigators, the discovery was electrifying. After more than 20 years of darkness, they had glimpsed the Strangler's shadow once again. Families were quietly informed, the news striking them like lightning. Emily's parents broke down, weeping at the possibility the truth was still out there. Melissa's mother, her hair now silver, whispered through tears, "I knew it. I always knew Daniel wasn't the one." Karen's father, frail and hollowed by time, sat long in silence before rasping, "If justice is coming, it's too late." Springfield, too, began to stir with rumor as word leaked that DNA was being tested, that the Strangler may never have been behind bars. The terror of the 80s flickered back into the present, drifting through streets and homes like a ghost. But, for the cold case unit, this was not just about Springfield. It was about proving that technology could resurrect justice from forgotten files. In a sterile lab, sweat dampening the collars of tired analysts, every number on the screen carried the weight of hope. The team leaned forward as the genealogy experts finalized their results. The laboratory grew so quiet that even the hum of machines seemed deafening. After 2 decades, the Springfield Strangler's face was about to emerge from the shadows. After weeks of painstaking work, piecing together generations of family records, birth certificates, marriage licenses, and civic data, the genetic genealogy Team traced the DNA trail to a narrow branch of a single Ohio family. The breakthrough came when the partial CODIS match was finally placed in context. The man in the database wasn't the killer himself, but a close relative. As analysts eliminated women, children, and anyone unlikely to have lived near the murder scenes in the mid-80s, one name remained, standing alone like a grim revelation: Mark Benson. Born in 1957, Benson had been an electrician in Springfield during the exact years of the murders. The moment his file appeared on screen, the room froze. Not only had he lived just blocks from Emily Harper's apartment, he had done repair jobs on Belmont Avenue, where Emily had died. He worked with cords, ropes, and belts daily, tools that echoed in the haunting signatures of the crimes. It was as if the evidence had been hiding in plain sight all along. The deeper they looked, the darker the picture became. Records showed Benson had been called to fix electrical lines near Dr. Karen Whitfield's home just weeks before her murder. And in Melissa Carter's neighborhood, he'd worked on wiring for a corner store only 2 blocks away. Each connection tightened like a noose, revealing a chilling reality. The Strangler hadn't been some shadowy phantom, but a man trusted to walk into homes, unnoticed because he seemed ordinary. Retired Lieutenant Robert Manning, brought in as a consultant, trembled as he stared at Benson's old photo. Unkempt hair, plain clothes, eyes that revealed nothing. "We let him walk free for 20 years, Manning whispered. The words landed like a stone in the silent room, but uncovering his name wasn't enough. The DNA link only suggested relation. They needed a direct match. Without it, Benson would remain untouchable. So the team began a careful surveillance operation. Detectives trailed him through Dayton, collecting discarded trash, cigarette butts, coffee cups, anything that might hold saliva or skin cells. Yet Benson was a recluse. He moved between home and work with little social interaction, never careless enough to leave an easy trace. Meanwhile, investigators dug through his past. Former neighbors recalled a man who seemed polite on the surface, but unnervingly unreadable, the kind of presence you never quite trusted but couldn't explain why. And as they built the case brick by brick, one thought haunted them. The monster Springfield had feared wasn't a ghost at all. He had been standing right beside them, invisible in his ordinariness. Mark Benson's name in the report was more than just a lead. It was a reckoning. For over 20 years, the justice system had pointed its finger at the wrong man, and Springfield had lived under the illusion of safety while the true predator blended seamlessly into ordinary life. The thought was as staggering as it was infuriating. Yet, in May of 2008, the break finally came. After weeks of fruitless surveillance, Benson left behind a paper cappuccino cup in a suburban Dayton coffee shop. An undercover officer, timing his move with surgical precision, slipped it into an evidence bag. 72 hours later, the lab confirmed the truth. The DNA was a perfect match to evidence from all 3 murders. No more doubt, no more speculation. The Springfield Strangler had a face, and his name was Mark Benson. On June 12, 2008, just after sunrise, a SWAT team descended on his neat blue home. The scene could have belonged to any American suburb. A freshly mowed lawn, a swing creaking on the porch, the scent of morning coffee still in the air. Benson, dressed casually to take his son to baseball practice, opened the door to find rifles aimed at him. His mask of normalcy cracked for an instant, his eyes flashing cold before settling into a chilling stillness. Neighbors who had trusted him with their children, who had watched him coach Little League games with laughter, were stunned to learn that the man who taught their sons to pitch was the same one who bound and strangled 3 young women. The facade had shattered. For Daniel Price, the man wrongfully imprisoned in Benson's place, the revelation was both vindication and tragedy. From his prison cell, he broke down, saying, 23 years, my life was stolen, and now they finally believe I'm innocent. His words cut deep into the credibility of the system that had condemned him on nothing more than a coerced confession. His attorney immediately filed for appeal, and the world was forced to reckon with how badly Springfield had failed both the victims and the innocent man it scapegoated. Families of the slain women were overwhelmed by a storm of emotions. Emily, Harper's parents, clung to each other, sobbing at the news. Melissa Carter's mother nearly collapsed, whispering that she had known, deep down, Daniel was never the one. Karen Whitfield's father lit a candle in silence, his voice rough with age as he murmured to his daughter's photograph, "My girl, this day has finally come." Relief, grief, rage, they all collided at once. Springfield itself erupted into debate. Some residents celebrated the long-delayed justice, while others demanded to know how authorities could have imprisoned the wrong man and allowed a killer to live undetected for decades. Inside Clark County Jail, Benson sat stone-faced, his expression unreadable. He offered no confession, no denial, only the flat request for a lawyer. An investigator later admitted he could have been anyone, a neighbor, a coach, a father. That was the most terrifying truth of all. The Springfield Strangler wasn't a monster in the shadows. He was a man everyone thought they knew. The arrest of Mark Benson didn't just end an investigation. It shattered Springfield's sense of identity. The community was forced to face the most unsettling reality of all. The monster wasn't a shadow on the fringes, but a neighbor who smiled at barbecues and cheered from the Little League bleachers. Newspapers screamed headlines, like "Serial Killer Unmasked After 20 Years" and "Baseball Coach Revealed as Springfield Strangler." Suddenly, a town that rarely made state news was thrust under a relentless national spotlight. Neighbors who once swapped tools and laughter with Benson now stood stunned before cameras, their trust fractured beyond repair. "He fixed my porch." "Light," one neighbor said through trembling disbelief. "If he's the killer, who can we trust anymore?" Springfield split in two. Many accepted the DNA as irrefutable proof and clung to the relief that justice had arrived. But others, especially those who knew him personally, couldn't reconcile the friendly father with the predator described on TV. His wife publicly defended him, her voice shaking as she declared, "Mark is a good man, he loves his children, I'll never believe he did this." His sons, caught in the storm, endured cruel whispers at school, while a friend recalled the youngest boy's desperate question, "Why does everyone hate my dad?" The media circus devoured every fragment of Benson's past. Old job records, high school anecdotes, and idle rumors were inflated into narratives dissected by panels of psychologists and former investigators on evening broadcasts. Talk shows posed agonizing questions. How could the justice system imprison the wrong man for 23 years? How could a father and coach live undetected as a killer? Could this failure ever be redeemed? In Springfield itself, emotions spilled into the streets. Vigils lit the night in solemn remembrance, candles flickering in the shape of crosses outside churches, while anger boiled outside the police station. Protesters holding signs that read, "Delayed justice is no justice." The families of the victims became the unwilling faces of the tragedy. Emily Harper's parents choked through tears as they spoke of relief intertwined with fresh pain. Karen Whitfield's family retreated into silence, vowing only to let the court speak for them. Melissa Carter's mother broke down on live television, her voice breaking as she cried, "We lived in darkness for 22 years. Now the darkness has a name, but it doesn't bring my daughter back." Springfield, once a town defined by stillness, was consumed by noise, cameras, reporters, and endless questions. The nightmare of the 80s had returned, not with silence, but with an overwhelming roar. And then came July 20th, 2008. The courtroom in Columbus was suffocating with tension as Daniel Price, who had entered prison at 23 and lost 23 years of his life, stood to hear the judge's words. Daniel Price is hereby declared innocent of the charges brought against him in 1987. The gavel struck, and the room gasped. Daniel, now 46, stood frozen, unable to process freedom. His face, gaunt and lined with sorrow, brimmed with tears. For Springfield, it was a day of reckoning. Justice had finally spoken, but it came 2 decades too late. Daniel Price's release was both triumphant and devastating. A moment that revealed the resilience of the human spirit, but also the unforgiving cruelty of a broken system. In the courtroom, when his trembling hands clutched his chest and he collapsed sobbing, silence fell heavy. Then came Eleanor, his frail mother, moving slowly, on her cane to embrace the son she had prayed for every night over 2 decades. "Mom, I'm home," Daniel repeated, his voice breaking as they clung to each other, their tears erasing years of injustice, if only for that fleeting instant. The next day, the image of mother and son dominated front pages across Ohio. But, Behind the celebration lay the crushing truth. Daniel had entered prison as a gentle young man in his 20s and emerged at 46, gray-haired, hollow-eyed, robbed of youth, freedom, and a life of his own. In his first interview, he admitted, "I prayed every day for the truth to be found, but I never thought it would come so late. I lost my whole life waiting for this day." His words pierced the state's conscience. Human rights advocates denounced the case as a damning example of coerced confessions and systemic failure, while legal experts debated on television. Was Daniel a scapegoat chosen to calm a terrified community? Was his disability exploited by investigators desperate for closure? Springfield, too, wrestled with guilt. Neighbors who once cursed him as a monster now wept in shame, while others struggled to accept that justice had been so catastrophically wrong. Daniel, meanwhile, faced freedom like an exile. His father was long dead, his sister gone to another state, his old friends scattered. He had no money, no career, no family, only his elderly mother to lean on. He walked Springfield streets quietly, noticing the smell of cut grass, the sound of children playing, the warmth of sunsets he hadn't seen in 23 years. Each simple joy was laced with bitterness. Editorials called for reform. One lawyer declaring, "Without modern DNA, Daniel Price would have died in prison. This isn't just a mistake, it's a crime of the system." Springfield had found its strangler, but it had also created another victim, Daniel Price, the man who lost half his life in a cell for someone else's sins. By November of 2009, the town braced for the final reckoning. The trial of Mark Benson began in Clark County, and it was more than a proceeding against one man. It was a confrontation with the shadows of an entire community's past. From dawn, lines stretched outside the courthouse, cameras from every major network trained on the doors, reporters jostling for angles. Security doubled, not only for fear of disruption, but because the trial had become a crucible of outrage and grief. 20 years of buried questions finally dragged into the light. Inside the courthouse, the weight of 24 years pressed down on every breath. The prosecutor's voice cracked like thunder as he laid out the charges. First-degree murder in the deaths of Emily Harper, Dr. Karen Whitfield, and Melissa Carter. DNA didn't just suggest Benson's presence, it confirmed it, tying him inescapably to the cords, the scarf, and the biological traces sealed away for decades. In the gallery, the victims' families bore the anguish like open wounds. Emily's parents gripped each other's hands, trembling. Melissa's mother clutched her daughter's photograph, refusing to let it leave her sight. Karen's family sat silent, their piercing glares locked on the man in the orange jumpsuit. Mark Benson, once the trusted neighbor and baseball coach, sat hollow and expressionless, eyes cast downward as though refusing to confront the destruction his life had wrought. The defense tried to chip away at the science, suggesting contamination or mishandling. But expert testimony demolished these claims, walking the jury step by step through the sealed chain of custody and the precision of modern forensic testing. Then came the moment that silenced the entire room. Crime scene photos, sealed since the 80s, were projected onto the wall. The images of Emily's lifeless body on her apartment floor, Karen's home disrupted by cords, Melissa's bedroom with the scarf cruelly wound around her neck. All of it tore open wounds the community had tried to bury. Stifled sobs echoed through the chamber. The prosecutor closed with words that seemed to freeze the air. The Springfield Strangler never vanished. He lived among us, and today, justice will name him. Witness testimony only deepened the dread. A neighbor remembered seeing Benson near Emily's building but dismissed it at the time because he was familiar, unthreatening. A co-worker recounted Benson's odd fascination with cords and ropes, tools he always carried. Layer by layer, the mask of normalcy fell away until only the predator remained. After 3 harrowing weeks, the jury deliberated for just 4 hours. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. When the judge pronounced the sentence, death by lethal injection, the room seemed to exhale at once. Families wept openly, others clutched hands in relief. But Benson himself sat unmoving, eyes vacant, as if hollowed out long before the words were spoken. The press branded it Springfield's historic trial, not just because a serial killer was condemned, but because it laid bare a second tragedy. the wrongful imprisonment of Daniel Price, who had lost nearly half his life to a justice system blinded by fear. The state was forced to reckon with itself, to ask how truth could be so easily buried and how many more Daniels might be languishing in cells. Yet for Springfield, there was no celebration. People left the courthouse quietly, their relief tempered by grief, their victory soured by the years it had cost them. Justice had come, but at a terrible price. In the weeks that followed, the story spread beyond Springfield. Filmmakers, journalists, and activists sought the voices of the families who had lived this nightmare, not as statistics, but as broken people carrying unimaginable loss. The first gathering was at Springfield's First Baptist Church, the same sanctuary where Emily Harper's funeral had been held in 1984. Her parents, now in their 70s, sat before a crowded hall of cameras and notebooks. Mr. Harper's voice cracked as he spoke words that silenced even the most hardened reporters. For 24 years, every morning when I opened my eyes, I heard my daughter screaming for help, and every night when I closed them, I saw her lying there, hands bound, eyes wide. Not one day have we truly lived since then. His wife's hand tightened around his, both of them tethered to memories they could never escape. The families' voices transformed the trial's aftermath into something larger than a verdict. They became the conscience of Springfield. Emily Harper's mother, voice trembling, admitted she had never stepped into her daughter's room again, leaving it untouched for 24 years as if Emily might walk back in one day. For her, Benson's death sentence was no triumph, only a truth delivered far too late. Dr. Karen Whitfield's brother, now gray with age, remembered his sister as the family's beacon, a brilliant young doctor dreaming of a clinic for the poor. Justice was served, he said, but it doesn't bring Karen back. We lived 23 years asking why. Now we have an answer, but the emptiness will never be filled. Their mother whispered brokenly, I lost my daughter, then my faith in everything. When the Carter family appeared, grief flooded the room. Melissa had been only 16. Her brother, now a father himself, recalled the night his mother collapsed screaming her name. She should be here now, raising her own children. Instead, her life stopped at 16, ended by a man we once called a neighbor. Melissa's mother clutched a photo of her daughter in a graduation dress she never wore, sobbing live on television. That white dress, hanging forever unworn in a closet, became the symbol of Springfield's stolen future. Across Ohio, people embraced Emily, Karen, and Melissa not just as victims, but as daughters, sisters, and friends who deserved to be remembered for their lives, not only their deaths. Forums, prayer vigils, and editorials raged not only at Benson, but at the system that condemned Daniel Price in their place. For the first time, the three families sat together in a televised interview, holding hands, their grief braided into a shared demand: justice, reform, and truth. What had once been private sorrow became a collective voice. Springfield, long silenced by fear, began to speak again. The community raised scholarships in the girls' names, built a memorial in Central Park, and turned mourning into a movement. The Springfield Strangler case ended with Benson's death sentence and Daniel's exoneration, but its echoes reverberated far beyond Ohio. It was not only the story of a serial killer unmasked after decades, but a landmark in forensic history. Before 2000, cold cases often died in dusty files, evidence sealed, families left with questions. Springfield changed that. DNA genealogy, linking crime scene evidence to relatives through national databases, proved that silence could be broken even after decades. A single partial match to an ordinary electrician unraveled the lies of 20 years. At forensic conferences nationwide, Springfield was hailed as a turning point. Other states poured resources into cold case units, investing in DNA as the most powerful tool against violent crime. Yet science was only part of the legacy. The case forced America to confront its justice system's failures. Daniel Price's coerced confession became a rallying cry against interrogation abuse. Lawmakers in Ohio passed reforms mandating every interrogation be recorded start to finish, with any confession obtained outside those parameters subject to dismissal. Advocacy groups demanded training for police on working with individuals with intellectual or mental disabilities, ensuring no vulnerable person would again be so easily sacrificed to fear. Springfield's tragedy reshaped law enforcement, blending technology with accountability. It left behind 3 graves, a scarred but free man, and a town forever changed. The nightmare proved that darkness can wear the face of a neighbor, but also that truth, though buried, can rise again. The Springfield Strangler case closed not only with a death sentence, but with a legacy that reshaped justice across America. What began as a story of terror in the mid-80s ended as a testament to science, reform, and resilience. In Springfield itself, the transformation was profound. A town once consumed by fear and distrust became one of Ohio's first to create an annual fund for DNA testing in unsolved cases, fueled not just by state money, but by neighbors who donated, organized events, and built scholarships in the victims' names. That local movement spread across the state and beyond, inspiring a national push. No case should ever be forgotten. But the case also left America grappling with deeper questions. If justice comes decades late, after families suffer in silence, after an innocent man's youth is stolen, can it still be called justice? Law schools, courts, and legislatures debated the meaning of delayed justice, some calling it a bitter apology, others calling it proof that truth, though buried, can still emerge. Daniel Price's embrace of his elderly mother, 23 years stolen yet tears of freedom flowing, became the living image of delayed justice, while the families of Emily, Karen, and Melissa turned grief into collective action, reminding us that justice isn't just verdicts, it's listening, empathizing, and changing. Springfield's name now echoes far beyond Ohio. Criminology conferences invoke it as the case that showed how a small community can change a nation. Forensic genealogy, once untested, became a cornerstone of modern investigation, leading to the capture of killers across the country, from California's Golden State Killer to cases in Florida, Texas, and beyond. Yet alongside the triumph of science, Springfield carried a warning. The justice system can fail, especially the vulnerable. Daniel Price's coerced confession remains a symbol of why transparency in interrogation and protections for the disabled are essential. Lawmakers responded with reforms, mandating recorded interrogations and specialized police training, so that no one else would endure his fate. Today, a plaque in Springfield Central Park bears the names Emily Harper, Karen Whitfield, and Melissa Carter beneath the haunting words, "No one is forgotten. No truth stays buried forever." Flowers, candles, and letters from strangers rest there still, proof that Springfield chose to remember. The case left scars, but also light. It proved that science can unmask even the most ordinary neighbor, that truth can claw its way back through decades of silence, and that communities can rise from tragedy with resolve. In modern America, where injustice persists, the lesson endures. Justice delayed must not mean justice denied. Every voice, every action, every refusal to let silence bury truth is part of that fight. Springfield proved it. If you believe stories like this must be told, stories of darkness confronted, truth resurrected, and justice redefined, please subscribe and join us on this journey to unearth more buried truths. Because justice, though it may be delayed, never truly vanishes.